Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Getting the Job International Student Edition. I'm really excited to have Yewande here, an international student from Nigeria who's currently working at Deloitte. Yewande, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background?
Sure. So my name is Yewande Marquez. Like you said, I am originally from Nigeria. I've been in the US now about 5.5 years. I got my undergrad in Nigeria and I came to the US for my master's. So I got my master's in applied economics and technology project management from Illinois State University. And for the last 3 years, I've been working as a technology consultant for Deloitte. Is
That's
there
so
anything else I missed?
exciting. So while
Mhm.
you were studying, did you partake in any internships before you accepted a full-time job?
Yes. So I had two internships, and if you remember from my intro, I said I had two masters. So I ended up spending, instead of 2 years, standard 2 years in grad school, I spent 2 years, 2.5. So I had 5 semesters. So that meant I had 2 summers. So my first summer, I worked as a regulatory affairs intern. So I worked at a natural gas utility company in Chicago, and that was when I first started with like my applied economics degree. And the internship, I had looked for it, but I didn't have to look too hard because my program at the time helped pair students
Oh,
with internship
great.
offers. So I got that internship, but then I realized I didn't really want to work in that space. So I had to kind of go back to the drawing board a little bit to figure out what else I could do. But by my second internship, I worked as like a business analyst intern at a food processing company in Minnesota. So I got to work, and it was like a plant setting, not necessarily like a corporate office. So there was an office, but I got to work in the plant. So it was a very interesting experience in the sense that it was different from what I was. I didn't necessarily seek out to work in a plant, but then it turned out to be the internship that gave me a lot of clarity in terms of what I wanted.
Oh, wow. And so I know you said with the first one that your university program really helped you pair yourself with the internship. The second
Mhm.
one that was at this plant, did you find it yourself or was it also a part of the university?
So that one I had to find myself. And I can kind of share some more about how I went about that process. If is that fine?
Yeah, that would be great.
Okay, yeah. So, just kind of backtrack in terms of how I got to that point. So, I mentioned I started off with an applied. I came to the US to study a master's in applied economics. But as I started that program, I had my internship, and I realized, okay, I don't think I really want to do this. But with starting off my second master's, I was already taking classes in that department. That's the Department of Technology. I was taking like elective classes just to make up my credits, and then as I started to do more of those classes, I realized I had an interest in that area. I always had an interest, but I realized maybe I would explore it more and go get an actual degree as opposed to just getting like my three elective courses and be done. So as I started doing that, I started to then try to redefine what it is I wanted in terms of like my job, my role, and I was able to find the intersection between the skills I had gotten from economics and then the skills I was learning in this new department. So I thought, okay, hey, I have all this data, statistical analysis skills that I've gotten from economics. While I'm not too interested in the research aspect of it, definitely see myself working in like a corporate space, and I think that I can apply to this new area. So then I kind of redefined myself and really started looking for like business analyst roles, data analyst roles, and that was how I ended up starting to look for internships. And in the course of reaching out to people, because I did a lot of networking, I had a friend who had a friend who was working at this company. And it was really just a case of, I'll send you my resume. Can you put in a referral for me? And that was what he did.
Yeah, we always say that's a big thing. So many people undermine networking in the 1 month before. Now they're like, wait, where do I make these connections? So when you already have real connections and they really help you
Mhm.
just kind of get a foot in the door, and then you're responsible for the actual interview itself. So how did this process differ from a full-time job? Was Deloitte the first company you started working for after you graduated?
Yes, Deloitte was the first company I started working for, but then I had gone through like several different rejections before I got into Deloitte.
Oh, wow. Could you, like, if you're comfortable, talk lightly on like rejections that you faced and how you dealt with the rejections?
Mhm. So I can take a step back again. So with my first internship, that was summer of 2016. At the time, I hadn't started my second master, so I was looking to graduate in May of 2017. And I knew that a lot of companies started, I know that they start the hiring cycle the year. before, and I was targeting like big companies. So I started applying like September of 2016, just applying for jobs. I didn't get
Yeah.
my first interview until March of 2017, even though I've been applying since September. So it was just a very long process of like dealing with rejections and like, oh my gosh, how am I ever going to get an interview? And I remember how I felt when I got my first interview, like, oh, yeah, I got one interview. I have to put all of my energy to prepare for that one interview. But then within that process, like I mentioned earlier about, going back to the drawing board, I had to, kind of reconfigure my approach several different times. So I had to go back to the drawing board and say, hey, what is it? What kind of roles am I looking for? How do I better position myself for these roles? How do I demonstrate all the things that I can do on my resume to make sure that I can get an interview? And when I get an interview, how do I craft my stories to make sure that I'm getting across, passing the message across, and they would think that I'm a good candidate. So I went through several different rejections up until the point where I was just like, you reject me, whatever, we move on. Keep moving until the next role. But along the process of rejections, I would say I had to constantly redefine myself. And I would say that the first time I applied to Deloitte, I was rejected. I applied for an internship position, which was for 2017, and I was rejected. So it's very funny that, months later, I applied again, and thankfully I got the interview, and I was able to put all of my attention into like just that interview and making sure that I aced the interview. But it's a grueling process, like when you're having to deal with like all of the rejections and it's mostly, I wouldn't say that it's mostly because they don't want to sponsor. Sometimes maybe you're not a good fit, or maybe you're not necessarily, maybe your resume is not good enough, or maybe you don't have like all of the keywords in your resume to get through the bots, because a lot of times it's just getting through that bots. I don't believe that there are a lot of recruiters who would be reviewing the actual resumes. So it's making sure that you're always putting your best foot forward. Another thing that I did throughout that process was I attended career fairs. So I went to the National Society of Black Engineers. I went to the Society of Women Engineers. I went to those two conferences, even though I'm not an engineer, but hey, there are a lot of companies there that were recruiting.
Exactly.
And it was a good way to, get face time with them. So I got interviews, but none of them translated into an offer. I do know a lot of people who went to those conferences and got offers. So all of that was part of my story of getting like rejections, where it got to the point where like my application to do it was just one random day. I just applied because it was a numbers game. I want to make sure I'm applying to 50 jobs this week, and making sure that every single day I'm applying, I'm hitting my targets. And then I would probably go through like maybe 1 or 2 weeks of not applying because I'm depressed of all the rejections, and I need to take a break in between to make sure that I can recalibrate and push myself to know why I'm doing this again. And then when I feel like ready to go, I pick up again and start applying. But it was an interesting, very tough process, I would say.
Yeah, I feel like I've been in the exact same boat where I would say treat getting a job like a full-time job, where you have to sit down, you have to tailor make these resumes. It's not just a quick thing. You have to really sit down. And I had the same thing, like 10 applications today, 10 applications tomorrow, because to some extent it is a numbers game. How did you feel like, if at all, being an international student came into play? Did you ever feel like there was a sponsorship issue? Did you bring it up? How did you navigate that entire situation?
I feel like there is always a sponsorship issue. And for me, I learned early on to be targeted, in the sense of not all companies are willing to hire internationals. So that's why I said I was very focused on targeting the bigger companies that I know would sponsor. However, I know that there are not all the big companies sponsor, and there are a number of small companies that would also sponsor. It was just my strategy to say, hey, I want to work at a big company that has presence in like different countries. So I'm going to target those big countries. And then another thing that I did was reaching out to people. So it goes back to the topic of networking. I use my LinkedIn a lot to reach out to people. There would be people that I would maybe see on like job boards, discussion groups, and like threads, and like not even on LinkedIn. But then I would go find them on LinkedIn and start a conversation. And starting that conversation would just be for me to ask like, hey, and a lot of times they would be working in companies I'm interested in. So start the conversation and say, hey, I found your profile here, and I think that, I would be interested in learning more about what you would do. And not everyone will respond, obviously, but some people are willing to respond and share their experiences. And once that door is open for conversation, I can then ask more questions about the culture, what's the company like? And then, do you know anything about sponsorship? And some people would be upfront and tell me my company doesn't sponsor, or some of them may not know, and they may point me in the direction of someone who may know. Or some would refer me and say, okay, my company doesn't sponsor, but I can point you to this company who I think sponsors, or maybe you should try looking at these kind of companies. And those conversations were very helpful for me in terms of, identifying where to target and focus my attention. So that way I'm looking in one direction. I'm not wasting my time. And then whenever the conversation of sponsorship came up, whenever I would have an interview, so there would be some companies who would tell you, oh, we're sorry, we don't sponsor, because it got to the point where, when you're filling out the application, and they asked you now or at this time. I used to say
I'm like
yes.
getting a flashback. I'm getting a flashback of
I used to say yes, and then after a while, I stopped saying yes because I'm like, I'm going to have OPT. I can work. I'm authorized to work just to get my foot in the door. So there will be some companies who would tell you, oh no, we don't sponsor, or some would say we're open to having the discussion. So that way, if they're open to having that discussion, then you can make sure you put your best foot forward. So it was, but a lot of cases, like that conversation didn't come up until like the very end, or maybe I didn't make it to the interview process, but they would have been willing to sponsor. So I would say my biggest advice around that is being targeted in your approach and trying to find companies that sponsor.
So I know you said you got this interview, and then you said all your efforts went in here to really make sure you showed your best self. So what did the preparation look like? One of my majors was consulting. So case in point, that book still circles my head a little bit. So could you maybe touch on that process, what you did to prepare, and whatever details you're comfortable sharing about the process?
So I would say that what I did, I don't know if everyone does this, but what I personally do is, or what I used to do, and I still kind of do that, is that for every single company I'm applying for and I get an interview, I create a Word document or a Google Doc, and I put all of the information I can find online about that company in that Google Doc. So for like Deloitte and for other companies I applied to at the time, I would always go on Glassdoor, and Glassdoor would have like typical interview questions. So I go on Glassdoor and look at every single interview for the role I'm applying for and copy out the questions, and then get some behavioral questions from like Indeed, Monster, and then have all those questions in one Google Doc, and then start to frame my responses to those questions. So trying to anticipate the potential questions that I could be asked, and making sure that I have a response for each one. And then if you're familiar with like the STAR format or the CAR format, I use the STAR. So for like, I would have like specific stories that I want to highlight, and make sure I write out like the situation, task, action, result in my documents. And then writing out like the key things about the company. So if it's like Deloitte, what are some key things to know about Deloitte? What role am I applying for within Deloitte? I was applying to technology. So what are some things about technology? And that also helps frame the types of questions I'm going to ask the interviewer as well. Now, when you're applying to places like consulting firms, you would get like the case interviews. So in my case, Deloitte was like maybe the second consulting company I applied to. So I wasn't all too familiar with like the case interview process. It wasn't until I got my interview, oh crap, I have to prepare for a case interview. So then I had to go online and watch a lot of YouTube videos about, what to expect from a case interview process. How do you prepare for a case interview? And then do a lot of practice cases. Then I did most of them by myself, but when I could, I would ask a friend or two to help practice. But I would say, depending on the consulting company you're applying to, some of them also have like resources that are helpful for case preparation. Then there are also a lot of resources online about case prep that you could find. YouTube has a ton of videos. If you're applying for management consulting, there are a lot of management consulting websites that have resources that are helpful for those interviews. But in my case, what has always helped me is just making sure that I have that Google Doc that has all of the information. And it's perfect if it's a phone interview, because I'm on the phone and I'm able to scroll through my
looking at your document
and I can respond. I literally know where the particular stories, I can just scroll to it and see what I have to say. If it's not a phone interview, just making sure that I know my stories by heart. But I'm by nature very organized and like to write everything out. So it helps for me to write everything and know the gaps in terms of what I need to prepare for, so that way I'm well prepared and I feel like I've covered all my bases.
And what about something that's more generic, in the sense the market sizing questions, where I didn't know if you got any at Deloitte, but tell me how many cows are in America, or how many miles can a car go from here to here? How would you take that approach? Because it's less of things you can memorize and more of your strategic thinking.
I didn't get those questions, but I remember reading that. I don't know that companies still ask those questions anymore. I feel like I remember reading that for one of the consulting companies recently because they felt like those types of questions weren't like a good judgment of your like problem solver and strategic thinking skills. So they just stuck to like actual cases.
Could you maybe tell us a little bit about your role and what you do? And the word consultant is very broad and exciting, but I feel like it's difficult to know what that means before you're actually in the role.
Mm-hmm. You're absolutely correct. I don't think I really had a good enough. I knew about consulting, but I don't think I really had a good enough understanding of consulting until I started working in consulting. Like, oh my God, this is what it is. So what I do in my role as a technology consultant, specifically for me, I would say I specialize in the delivery of enterprise systems. So I work very closely with clients who are trying to transition from old systems, old archaic systems that no longer work for them, to new systems. So I help design new processes, new configurations, and new technologies that would help them be able to perform some of their day-to-day tasks. So in my role, my clients are typically people who work with like accounting, procurement, human resource functions. And my team and I, we work with trying to design a new system for them. Now, that sounds broad and sounds vague, but I would say from when I first started in consulting, I started as entry level. So I started off working with like, trying to understand like the role, like our role as the systems integrator, and trying to understand what we're doing for the client. So I started off working with like project management tasks, which help give me a good overview of what the project is. So consulting is typically, as a consulting firm, clients, or we call them industry, people who have needs, who would be like regular companies. They hire consulting firms for their expertise and for their knowledge, and who can help them solve a particular problem. So it could be a management problem, a process improvement, process efficiency problem, or a systems technology problem, or an analytics problem. But the point of bringing consultants on is that they are supposed to be experts in a particular field and can help work the client through from, ideating the problem down to like implementation, and leaving them with like a roadmap to help them after the consultants have left. So me working in technology just means I just help deliver technology solutions. The management consultants are a little different in that they help to understand like what the problem is, and then they can help come up with like a strategy or a plan that the clients could use that could help the clients solve their problem.
I have another question that's not directly related, but just personally, I'm a woman of color in business. You're a woman of color in business. Do you feel well supported, or what is that like working in consulting as a field?
That's a very interesting question. So when you say well supported, do you mean like by my team or by
I would say
who?
generally a representation. Do you feel well represented at your firm? Do you feel like you see women in leadership, not just in like the lower level positions? And I guess just the general theme of diversity and inclusion.
That's a good question. So I sit in technology, and I think it's been established that there aren't as many women in technology, let alone women of color. So I remember on my team, my previous team, for like over 9 months, I was the only female on my team. Now I work with a lot of my coworkers are like from like Asian countries. So I don't know if I guess they would be considered people of color. But in terms of women of color, I would say there's definitely like a scarcity, so to speak, of women in technology, and I would say even in consulting. I've noticed in consulting that where I would generally find, and this is not a generalization, it's just where I typically have seen women of color at my firm are in roles that are not as technical, and roles that are more like management, human resources, training. I tend to see a lot of people of color there, and not as many in technology. However, I would say that at my firm, in the last year, I've done a pretty solid job of trying to ramp up. I think they've been doing this for years, but in the last year at least, they've tried to like increase the efforts in terms of like increasing diversity recruiting, increasing like focus hiring from like specific like HBCUs, just to increase the number of people that are coming in. So the number of people that come into the pipeline pipeline. The pipeline as it is right now may not necessarily have a lot of people of color or women of color, but they're definitely trying to see how we can improve that. In terms of support, I would say that I have, my friend, I would say that I have communities of people. I think this is, I don't know if this is a thing with, I think it's just a thing with humans in general. You tend to gravitate towards people that are like you or people that look like you. And that's like your safe space. So, and I think at most companies, they have like employee resource groups, and at Deloitte, we also have our different types of employee resource groups. And within those employee resource groups, you tend to find your own people. So there's one for women in technology, there's some for just women, there's some for, Black people, there's some for like different particular types of groups where you get to like find your own safe space, find your own community that can support you in your journey throughout the firm.
I think I had felt the same way at the past company I worked at, where I was like, I wish there was few more women in leadership who I could aspire to and be like, I want to be her in 5 years and 6 years. But I think other than that, more on the international student side now, do you have any general pieces of advice or things that you wish you knew when you were recruiting that you want to kind of pass the torch on to the international students who are looking for a job or have already accepted a job and are going into their first full-time role?
Yeah, so I can kind of split my advice into two parts because your question is kind of a two-part question. So I can give advice, my advice for people who are looking for jobs right now, and then say something that could apply to people who have just gotten offers and are, looking to get started. So in terms of people who are still applying, I would say the very first thing I would say is, approach rejection with a positive attitude, because you are going to get rejected. So it's just a matter of, finding the little things throughout in your life right now that will give you joy and then holding on to them, because it can be a very depressing, tiring journey of like keep getting rejected and I don't know what's coming next. I don't know where I'm going. My OPT is running out, and just like very frustrating and confusing. So just approach it, just try to keep a positive attitude and keep applying. On that note, as you apply though, I would say have a very clear idea of what it is that you want. So what kind of roles you're looking for. I've seen a number of people, and I think I fell into this trap when I was applying. You just apply for what you think makes sense. Oh, so I think that, companies that are hiring for data analysts, I'm going to market myself as a data analyst, but I don't have the skills for being a data analyst. So it's like there's gaps in my knowledge, and just recognizing that there are a lot of people out there who are looking for this job. So you have to stay competitive. So whatever field that it is you're looking to apply to, recognize like what you want and clearly define it. Then really evaluate your skill set and identify the gaps. So if you're trying to apply for a role in finance, and let's say maybe you're looking for an internship for, I don't know, this summer. Now, for people who have gotten offers and are looking to start, I would say congratulations. That's a really big deal. I would say that as you go into wherever it is that you're going to, goes back to knowing what you want to do, but also being open, being flexible. I'll give a good example and say a lot of people who come into consulting, they don't always like it in the beginning, because your very first project or first task that you're given most likely is not what you signed up for. Most likely is not what you thought you would be doing. But then there's beauty in just taking the process and learning with it, and just take each role and just make sure that whatever you do great work. And as you do that, you're building your network, you are learning what you want to do, what you don't want to do. And over time, as you kind of build a name for yourself, learn the tricks of the trade wherever it is, because every company you go to has a process, a policy. So as you learn the lays of the land, then you have a better understanding of where you want to go and who can help you get there. But just be open to learning more about wherever it is that you are. You don't want to come up as rigid. Maybe you wanted to do analytics, but they have you doing PowerPoint slides and you're just bitter. Just be patient. Do it, but do it well. So that way the next time you want to do analytics work, you can actually go and say, hey, I did this very well. Now can you give me the kind of work I want to do? So being open to the kinds of roles that you're given. And then I would also say, think 2 steps ahead. So while you found this company who's going to sponsor, start to think of no pressure, but just try to think of, okay, what else can I do from here? look at the company, look at the trajectory. What's the growth process like for you? Do you see yourself growing in this type of company, in this role, or would you be better off going somewhere else? What's the support like for you in terms of like how committed are they or are your employers to like your professional development? Because you want to make sure that you are growing into a sound
Learning.
career professional who can go on to somewhere else and be able to add value. So think about, just try and strategize and know that, the H1B lottery, it's still a lottery. We don't know what's going to happen in the next
Yeah,
1 to 3 years, but it's a lottery. So try and maybe if you have to explore other countries, and if you work for a big company with presence in other countries, then that's good for you. You may be able to explore and transfer to a different country if things don't work out here. But just start to have that conversation with yourself and start to think ahead of time. You don't want to get surprised if things don't work out for you.
a
Yeah, that's
hundred
my 2 cents.
percent. Well, this was amazing. I think this was so much insight. I'm so glad you took out the time on a Sunday. I'm sure you
Mm-hmm.
work all crazy hours, so I will give you back the rest of your Sunday. But we really appreciate you chatting with us, and we will tag you when we post this and hope that people listening take some advice or just some motivation and come out of this with a positive mindset.
Yep, of course. Thank you. Thank you for having me.